Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, this is Orphanlast, aka Skylar Madison, and recently Opentoonz 1.2.0 has just been released. Now, notice how this distribution of Opentoonz that I'm using currently right now says that it's still 1.1.3. Disregard that because I'm using a developer's build, and it is a Marevna edition. There's a few differences from this build of Opentoonz to the 1.2.0 version, and the reason why I'm using this version is because the default official version of 1.2.0 has caused a workflow breaking bug for me. But the differences shouldn't be so vast that you guys can't follow along. Everything that I'm showing here is stuff that's related to Opentoonz 1.2.0. If you happen to be experiencing problems with your graphics tablet, if I were you, I'd depend primarily on an OTX build that I believe was made on December 5th, 2017. If that still doesn't help, just keep going back in OTX releases. If you can't use OTX because you're a Linux user, I'd refer you to actually just keep using the 1.1.3 Marevna version for the time being. There's some really cool features in this program, especially the 1.2.0 version, but not having all of the new bells and whistles isn't the end of the world. I've been using 1.1.3 for a year now, and I can safely say that though these features are awesome, they're not essential because Opentoonz is already a full-featured animation suite. Opentoonz is just experiencing some growing pains at the moment, and there will come a point in time where Opentoonz will outgrow these sorts of problems. It's the second year of Opentoonz, so we can expect that it's going to have a few problems from time to time, and it's just experiencing some growing pains. The reason why some graphics tablets are experiencing some bugs is because they were successful in fixing the Mac OS X bug, which made it so that when you hover your stylus, you'd just be scribbling all over the screen for some reason. So in fixing that problem, they accidentally messed with some seemingly minor bits of code that tampered with some Wacom tablets and maybe a few others. Ultimately, if I wanted to use the 1.2.0 version, I would. It just means that I'd need to assign the mouse wheel, the scroll wheel, to a button on my stylus rather than having the keyboard shortcut set to Shift Space. But although a workflow is doable with the stylus as the mouse wheel, I'm not crazy about how interacting with the zooming in and zooming out feels with it calibrated that way on the stylus. So I'm going to stick with the workflow that I feel comfortable with, even if it means using a really unofficial developer's build of the program. If it isn't broken, why fix it? I'd like to give special thanks to Turtletooth for going through a lot of these release notes with me. Sometimes it just feels like going through deep water trying to figure out the release notes and figuring out GitHub. A link to Turtletooth's channel will be supplied in the video description below. Now, I would have released this video sooner, however, there are a number of new features in the program which are basically completely deactivated, so you need to go out of your way in order to find out how to activate them. And there's no documentation to tell us how to do that. And if the documentation is on GitHub, a lot of the time you have to read through huge blocks of text that are very high level that I just can't seem to understand. And so I needed some help to understand this release. And it was extremely frustrating because the release notes were saying one thing and the program was showing me basically the exact same thing that I was expecting from 1.1.3. So rest assured, I got everything figured out, and I'm showing you guys what I got figured out. Now, I don't know if anyone else has or will experience this issue, and I'm not sure if it's because I used a Marevna edition of Opentoonz, but the Opentoonz stuff folder didn't transition over to the new 1.2.0 folder. So you might want to copy and paste the projects folder into the new Opentoonz stuff folder. You won't want to copy and paste everything from the stuff folder and paste it in. You don't want to do that, because it'll cause all sorts of problems with the interface if you do that. Like, if you do that, you're basically pasting everything that makes 1.1.3 what it is into the 1.2.0 version. And thus, you'll pretty much be using 1.1.3, only icons will be missing, and the program will ultimately be completely unusable, and you'll have to reinstall the program. So only copy and paste the projects folder if the projects folder didn't already automatically transition to the new version. Now, you're seeing me do that right now, but keep in mind that I've been going through a number of different experimental releases of Opentoonz and developer builds, so some of the file names won't match what you have on the screen, but ultimately, the projects folder, you just move one project folder to another one. Now, let's look at the release notes. Look at these fixed crash bug fixes. Notice how they take up a significant amount of space here. So it's good to see that we're going to be getting a much more stable version of Opentoonz. Already with 1.1.3, I usually didn't have to worry about the program crashing, but now we don't need to worry about it nearly as much. So let's jump into the new features. The first thing that we need to talk about is the horizontal timeline option in the X sheet. And the only reason why I'm going to mention this one is because this is the first time that the horizontal timeline has been in an official release. And also, I'm mentioning this because there's going to be people who are brand new to Opentoonz. They might not know how to access the horizontal timeline. So this is how Opentoonz looks when you download it for the very first time. But first, let me go ahead and customize the interface so that everything is laid out to my liking. So we have this X sheet here, which is basically Opentoonz's original version of the timeline. A lot of people can find this thing pretty confusing, but it's really not that confusing at all. But if you're like me and you want a timeline that looks like most mainstream animation software out there, I can understand. You can just click this X sheet button and it gives you a timeline. If you want to get the X sheet back, you just click on the timeline button in the exact same location. Now, the timeline looks really, really nice in this version. The layout is different, and I'm happy to announce that the stacking order of objects is no longer in reverse. So if you have an object on the top of the horizontal timeline, it's now on top of the stacking order instead of at the bottom. That was always an irritation with the earlier unofficial builds with the horizontal timeline, and it always made the animation process way more complex than it needed to be. So I'm really glad that this has been improved. Now, notice we have these two buttons here that can control the opacity of the objects, and also if it was raster level here, I could add a filter to it. This button is a nice addition because I'm really not fond of hidden menus and options that are just hidden from you, and I just don't like that in the software I use, and I'm sure that I'm not alone in that. Another thing that I'd like to address about the horizontal timeline is that the X sheet just simply doesn't have this. Okay, basically you have this slider at the bottom of the timeline, and when you slide it around, you actually zoom in or out of the X sheet. That is so cool. This makes things so much more streamlined, makes the workflow faster. I love this. I love this. I'm so happy this is in the program. The next release note is on the My Paint brushes. Now, once again, this is something that has been available to the OTX and Marevna users, but it's the first time that it's appeared in an official version. The way that you access the My Paint brushes is you double-click on a style on a raster level, and the style editor will appear, and then select the raster tab, and you can see a ton of different brushes. After you select one of these brushes, you can select the Settings tab, and you're able to really customize these brushes and their behavior to suit your needs. The next release note is snapping and frame range options for the vector brush. This is really helpful because if I select the brush tool and click on the snap checkbox, I have a little drop-down menu that allows me to control how strong the snap threshold is. So I go ahead and draw something. And when I draw the second line right at the end points of the first line, a little green circle appears, which basically means that some tape tool functionality has been added to the brush tool. And this will make it so that you actually want to color your vector work with the vector level. You can have a little more ease while doing so. In my opinion, this is a big improvement. I do plan on using it from time to time, but vectors will not be the primary means of coloring my animations because it really doesn't take much effort to break the vector coloring engine. If I start moving things around, basically what winds up happening is the image winds up recoloring itself, and no amount of pressing Ctrl Z will fix it. For some reason, the vector fill engine, whatever you need to call it, just simply does not keep track of its prior states. So that is really frustrating. But I'm glad to see that efforts have been put into place in improving this portion of the program. Now, let me show you the frame range brush. At the tool options, you set the spacing, and that'll turn on the frame range brush. You go ahead and draw out a shape, insert a bunch of levels, and draw another shape on a level that's pretty distant from the first shape that you drew. And then it'll suddenly have all of the in-betweens all drawn out from the first shape that I drew to the last drawing that I drew. I'm not sure how effective this can be. Maybe it'll be good for rough animations. Maybe it'll be good for animating effects like smoke, dust, particles, things like that, water splashes, water ripples. I personally think that you might be able to draw out a silhouette of a character or draw out the outline of the character and basically animate the borders of the character with this frame range brush. But I have a feeling that you'll need to have a number of lines in order to get it to in between properly. You have to draw them out pretty strategically. Next is the guided drawing vector brush. Please keep in mind that this only works with Toonz vector levels. So here I am, I draw out a smiley face. I can go ahead and go to the next frame, right click, and go to the vector guided drawing portion of the drop down list, and then I select closest drawing. Then I turn on the onion skin, and we can see what order I went through in order to draw this object here, and the direction of the lines that I was drawing them in, and where the starting point for each line happens to be. So here I go ahead and draw out the same smiley face in a different location, and I also make it fairly small. And notice that the guide changes for each line to indicate which line I need to draw next, where to draw it, and what direction to draw it. I now go to the level strip and press insert a bunch of times to add a bunch of empty pieces of digital paper. I then select all of the empty papers and click the gray in-between button on the level strip, and it automatically animates all of the in-betweens. We can see that there's a problem with it, but that's not my fault, and it's really not the software's fault either. The software interpreted how everything should go, and it really didn't do a bad job. Using vector-guided drawing and using automated in-betweens, if you're planning on using these things for finished work, you're going to have to really babysit it and have ideas as to how to use this feature for the future, but a practical workflow needs to be discovered. Next is the command bar panel. For those of you that haven't used Opentoonz before, I'm going to cover a few things for you. I put my mouse right at the column on the horizontal timeline, or the thumbnail on the X sheet, and right click, and at that point I click on Toggle X Sheet Toolbar. This gives you an extremely useful menu right above the X sheet or horizontal timeline. This tool is invaluable to have. Prior versions of Opentoonz before version 1.1.3 just simply didn't have this, and frankly, Opentoonz was a nightmare before 1.1.3 came out. And thank you, Turtletooth, for creating this amazing toolbar. The next thing that I'm going to show you guys is something called the command bar. And yet again, thank you, Turtletooth. This is the freaking coolest thing. I'm serious, this is awesome. I go to Windows command bar, and this window that looks identical to the X sheet toolbar appears. Now, both the X sheet toolbar and the command bar can be 100% customizable now in 1.2.0. You customize either one of them the exact same way as the other. You right click on the X sheet toolbar or the command bar, and a drop down menu appears with only one menu. You click on that, and to the left of this pop-up window, what's on the X sheet toolbar or the command bar. To the right is all of the goodies that you can put into the X sheet toolbar or the command bar. Now, for my workflow, I don't need the command bar to even resemble the X sheet toolbar. So I'm going to go ahead and remove everything that's currently there except for the separators, because I honestly don't know how to put a separator in there. Look, I don't know how to put a new one in there. I wish I did. It'd be nice if when I right click I could have two options instead of just one. I mean, the one that's there is good, the one that says remove whatever it is that I'm selecting, but another one would be nice where it says create separator, but that's neither here nor there. This is excellently executed. So now that I've gone ahead and gotten rid of everything in the command bar, I go to the right side and select File, which represents the File menu to the upper left of the screen. I select the Preferences and then click and drag it to the desired location to the left. I then select Configure Shortcuts and place it right underneath Preferences to the left. I then go into View, which represents the View menu to the upper portion of the screen. I know that I want to have things that relate to Shift and Trace. The first one I find is Edit Shift, then Reset Shift, and finally I find Shift and Trace. And I click and drag each one of them individually to the left in the desired locations that I want them to reside in and appear as in the command bar. I then press OK and watch how the command bar transforms. This is an amazing feature because having to search through drop-down menus all the time always slows down the workflow. So to demonstrate that it works, I click on Preferences on the command bar, and now I can quickly and easily edit the opacity of my onion skins. Now, I'm not liking the size of my level strip thumbnails, so I go into Interface and then pull out my calculator. I want these thumbnails to be 1/3 of the size that they currently are. So I type in 160 divided by 3 and get 53. So I type that in. Then I type in 90 divided by 3 and I get 30. So I type those numbers in and close out of the preferences. Now, nothing happened, but I'm going to close out of Opentoonz and open it up again. And there you have it. The level strip thumbnails have been reduced in size to save screen space, and keep things far less cluttered. Now, I go to the configure shortcut on the command bar, and I type in the top little search field, the word flip. I then see that we now have options to assign keyboard shortcuts for flipping the viewer horizontally and vertically. I personally assign flip horizontally to Alt-H and flip vertically to Alt-V. You can have them whatever you want to be. I wish we could have some standardized shortcuts and have them aplenty, but it is what it is. Now, to demonstrate the flipping action, I draw out a crappy profile view of a human head. I then press Alt-V to flip vertically. I then press Alt-H to flip horizontally. So that's some cool stuff right there. Now, let's take a look at the Shift and Trace tools that I put into the command bar. I click on Shift and Trace, I switch the frame on the horizontal timeline, and draw a dot on the screen to make the Shift and Trace appear on the screen. I can then click on Edit Shift and Trace to move it around and rotate it. So regardless of my onion skin being on or not, I can actually see the onion skin. And I can also see my Shift and Trace. And sometimes this can really come in handy in the process of animating characters, especially their in-betweens. In order to reset the Shift and Trace to the default position that it's referencing, you click Reset Shift and Trace, and always remember to get rid of the Shift and Trace by clicking on Remove Shift and Trace. Now here, I demonstrate that you can do the exact same thing to the X-Sheet toolbar. There's a lot more customizability to the Opentoonz interface due to these things here. The X-Sheet toolbar and the command bar. And seriously guys, if you run into Turtletooth, make sure to give him a huge thank you. I look forward to filling both of these tools with all sorts of buttons. And although I actually created 5 or 6 of the icons that are supposed to appear here in the command bar and the X-Sheet toolbar, they were kind of last-minute additions, and so they didn't quite make the cut for this official release. But once we do manage to get these icons into Opentoonz, it'll save even more screen space on these two tools, and we'll be able to add a hell of a lot more tools and features to them. We also have the lip sync pop-up. Here I quickly draw out a few stupid mouth shapes. I don't go through the full list of phoneme pronunciations, but I go to the timeline, right click, and click on Apply Lip Sync Data column. Here you get a pop-up, and you select the drawings and associate them to the mouth shape to the phoneme pronunciation. And then you click on this dotted button to find the Papagayo files that you're using to make your lip syncing done with a more automated process. Personally, I'd still want to plant in some in-betweens after the fact, but that's just me. Now, here's something that's not in the release notes, but it's something that's useful, and actually Noble Frugal Studio brought it to my attention, so special thanks to him. A link is supplied to the video description below. Now notice how I draw a shape on frame 1, and on the same column on the timeline I select a distant frame and draw something out. Now at first glance it seems like there's no problem here at all, but actually there's a huge problem in terms of how Opentoonz does its file management system. Now just notice that the first drawing on frame 1 says A, and the distant second drawing says B. And notice that when I select them, you don't see both of them in the level strip. That's because it created 2 different level strip files. This is really bad. You don't want to do this unless it's a special case where you might be reusing an animation from a prior animated scene or something like that. But in the case that it's bad, it's when it's not actually intentional. So I delete these 2 frames and go to Preferences, and in the Drawing tab in the Preferences, you go to Auto Creation and flip out the drop-down menu and select X sheet as animation sheet. Now, this is pretty cool. You're able to draw out a shape on frame 1, and then go to frame 14 and draw out another shape. And they both have the same file name. A. That's the name of the file here. And both drawings show up on the level strip. Next is something new to Opentoonz 1.2.0. In older versions of Opentoonz, it wouldn't matter what frame you drew things out in the timeline or X sheet. It would list the levels on the level strip as level 1 and level 2. But notice how the level strip literally is placing the frame number into the level number. So if I go on to level 4, I don't even need to press delete to get rid of this exposed level. I can actually just start drawing in, and it immediately treats it like it was an empty frame to begin with, because I set the X sheet as an animation sheet. There's a big perk to having it set up like this. Now notice that the level strip placed the drawing on frame number 4 in the level strip, and it's in the correct order, and it placed the number 4 on that level on the level strip. Now the next release note is the timecode effects. So here I go ahead and open up a scene that I've already worked on and go into the animation tab and go to the effects schematic. Here I right click and go add effects, go to render and select timecode Iowa. And I use the animate tool to move it to the upper portion of the screen. You can only see the time code with the preview mode turned on. And make sure that when you put this effects into the schematic, that you have frame 1 selected on your X sheet or your horizontal timeline. And once I press play with the preview mode turned on, it'll inform me of how much time has passed for this animation to play out. And this really helps with the process of working inside of a studio and figuring out the full length of each scene to comprise the full runtime of whatever film that you happen to be working on. Next is the pass-through effects. Let me demonstrate this. Let's say that we have a whole bunch of effects and the effect schematic starts to get so cluttered that it's absolutely impossible to read. Those of you that do cutout animations know what I'm talking about here. You can easily get the effect schematic way too overcomplicated. What Turtletooth says is that the pass-through effects is used for macros. You access the pass-through effects by right-clicking, add effects, go to utility, and select pass-through. Now the pass-through effects only allows one object to plug into the input, but it can output to as many things as you want. The pass-through effects doesn't actually do anything other than make sure that the effect schematic is more readable. Now, it's time to delete all of this and just go ahead and move on. Next is how we can customize the font and decide if we want all of the text on the screen to be bold or just some of it to be bold. Here, I had to open up OTX to show this off to you guys because this particular developer build that is an actual installable version doesn't actually have this particular feature. So on OTX it has it. So I go into Preferences and I click on Interface. You can change the font, and to the right of the drop-down list, you can select regular or bold text. Personally, I like it regular, so there's really no reason for me to change that up at all. I don't even want to do it really for this presentation even. But those are options available to you guys. That's awesome. I'm like, you can personalize it even. You might not see the change immediately after you change the font. If you don't, you might have to restart Opentoonz and then open it up again, and then you'll see the font change at that point. The next release note is use camera DPI for all imported images. All this means is that any image that you throw into Opentoonz from a third-party art program, the image will adopt the resolution to what's on your scene, your camera resolution and everything, so that you don't have to go out of your way to do a bunch of unnecessary extra work. Just make sure that when you first start working on a scene, the camera has the resolution that you actually want it to have, because the images won't auto-adjust to what you change it to after the fact. In fact, these two things are closely related on the release notes. They exist so that you can add things into your scene and so that they fit in the scene, that there's not multiple different resolutions going on all at once. Next is XSheet header layout. Now, the XSheet has two new icons that are set to the right of the render and the orange view edit button. Here we have the lock button and the down arrow key that basically helps you control opacity and such like that. Both, everything they did with the timeline and XSheet are huge improvements, and I'm super happy about these changes. Next, I go to Preferences, I go to Tools, and now your version of 1.2.0, you may see more options than what's on my screen, but that's fine. Basically, you access this drop-down menu and you select Cycle through available options. Then you go to Configure Keyboard Shortcuts and type in Geometric Shape, and you assign a keyboard shortcut to it. For me, I make it Alt/. So now, if I select the Geometry tool, I can press Alt/, and if you notice, I'm cycling through the drop-down menu. This makes it so that I don't have to keep moving my mouse up to the top of the screen a million times in order to access options that I need. I can just quickly cycle through them. And here I can show how effortless it is to change the geometry tool without having to leave the viewer with my mouse or my stylus. This version really got some cool stuff going on with it. Next is the down arrow creating another level on the level strip. This one you need to unlock like a number of these that I've shown you so far. First, I draw out a few shapes on my horizontal timeline. Now, it said that if I pressed down at the end of the level strip, it would create another level, but it's not doing anything. It can be very frustrating to read the release notes to a new version to a program, and you read what new features it has and all that have been added to the program, but you try to use them and they're not working. It's extremely frustrating because it makes you think that there was some sort of oversight with the release. But rest assured, there wasn't an oversight. You just need to activate these features. So we go to Preferences and click on the Drawing tab and click on the box that says down arrow at the end of the level strip creates a new frame. And now I'm able to press down at the end of the level strip and I can keep drawing out a new level. New digital pieces of paper. Now I can select these new levels and throw them into the timeline, and it looks good. This used to be a problem in prior versions of Opentoonz. If you wanted a new level, you'd have to press Insert, and it'd create a new level, but it'd only be above the last selected level. This allows you to do the same thing, but under the last level. Now, the last thing that I'd like to address is that they've now released a Russian translation of Opentoonz. So let me be first to welcome the newcomers to the community. We're glad to have you. It's nice to know that we now have a whole new nationality that can now share in the benefits of Opentoonz. And thank you to all the developers that happen to be working on this translation. Seriously. And just in case anybody feels left out, I'd actually like to take a moment to say thank you to all the developers in general that were involved with this project. Thank you very much for providing this version, Opentoonz 1.2.0. Alright, well, that pretty much concludes it for this video, ladies and gentlemen. If you guys enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you didn't like it, please like, share, and subscribe anyways, because I put a lot of effort into these videos. And if you'd like to see any of my other videos, feel free to click on any of them that happen to be appearing on the screen right now. You guys have a great day.